j'ai du soleil vert, des dentelles et des théières, des photos de bord de mer, dans mon jardin d'hiver. Je voudrais de la lumière, comme en Nouvelle-Angleterre. Je veux changer d'atmosphère, dans mon jardin d'hiver. Ma robe à fleurs, sous la pluie de novembre, tes mains qui courent, je n'en peux plus de t'attendre. Les années passent, il est loin, là je tombe. Nul ne peut nous entendre. Je voudrais du Fred Astaire, revoir un latte.
Each day, the lead impeachment manager, Adam Schiff, continued to make the case for why Bolton's testimony was so crucial, and yet, despite those daily entreaties and that explosive new allegation, the report from the New York Times, Senate Republicans refused to call John Bolton as a witness. Today we learned that Bolton's book does in fact resolve the key question behind the whole impeachment saga, confirming that Trump explicitly linked the security aid to Ukraine to investigations involving Joe Biden. In his book, Bolton writes, quote, "The next morning, August 20th, I took Trump's temperature on the Ukraine security assistance, and he said he wasn't in favor of sending Ukraine anything until all the Russia investigation materials related to Clinton and Biden had been turned over." Till they had been turned over. Of course, this belated admission is just one of many new revelations in Bolton's new book that we're learning now, 4 months after the Senate voted to acquit the president. Adam Schiff reacted today, tweeting, quote, "Bolton may be an author, but he's no patriot." Joining us now, the chairman of the Intelligence Committee, California Congressman Adam Schiff. Congressman Schiff, thank you for joining us this evening. I want to just start off with some reporting from the New York Times that federal prosecutors are weighing whether to criminally charge John Bolton with disclosing classified information in his upcoming White House memoir. The internal discussions about whether to charge Bolton are occurring at the highest levels of the Justice Department and involve Attorney General William Barr. I know you're no fan of John Bolton. I know you believe that if John Bolton had testified, there may have been a different outcome to the Senate impeachment trial. But what do you make of this reporting that Bill Barr, who we know very effectively carries Donald Trump's water, is looking at whether or not to charge John Bolton?
Well, the reporting doesn't surprise me, but it's enormously distressing that Bill Barr would once again, at Trump's insistence, contemplate using the Justice Department as a political tool to punish the president's enemies. I have no doubt that Bolton, much as I have a low regard for him and what he did, sought to get clearance from the review process, and that review process was politicized. The president insisting that he was not going to allow anything to be included in this book. That's not how that process is supposed to work. It's supposed to be apolitical, based on just what's classified or not classified. So I think this investigation is likely to be completely bogus, but it's a way of trying to chill people from speaking out about what they've seen, and it's a way for Bill Barr to do more dirty work for the president by threatening to prosecute the president's political enemies.
So John Bolton implies in the book that there is something that he wants to write about, or wanted to write about, regarding the conversation between Donald Trump and Xi Jinping, in which he implies that he asked Xi Jinping for assistance in buying agricultural stuff from America to help him in the election. Classified means there's a danger to people having that information, not unseemly or not something that the White House wants to be put out there. But it does seem that once again, this White House might be confusing those two issues.
Without a doubt. And we've seen this before. I think the White House views the classification process as a means of censoring information that is not classified, but would be highly embarrassing to the president. And the president's own words, what he told Xi in terms of trying to solicit foreign intervention to help his reelection campaign. It's such a profound similarity to his attempt to get Ukraine to help, his plea for Russia to hack Hillary's emails, that I'm sure he doesn't want his own words used, not because there's any classification risk. We already know the fact of what he communicated, but rather to avoid the embarrassment and the further incriminating nature of his specific comments.
Whether or not one likes John Bolton, he's spent a lot of years dealing with American policy and foreign policy, and he told Martha Raddatz of ABC that when you're dealing with somebody like Putin, who's made his life understanding Russia's strategic position in the world, against Donald Trump, who doesn't enjoy reading about these issues or learning about them, it's a very difficult position for America to be in. John Bolton suggesting that President Trump's ignorance is a security danger to America.
There's no question that that's true. His ignorance, but also just the self-serving quality of this president. Really, I think the harshest indictment that I've seen reported about Bolton's book, and it was very consistent with what we presented during the impeachment trial, is that the president consistently puts his own personal interest, his political interest, above that of the interest of the nation. We said he would do it again. Clearly, he did do it again repeatedly as part of a pattern. And that's the most serious indictment. And that's what really jeopardizes our country when you have a president who has so little regard for the best interest of the country and who constantly puts himself first.
It is Thursday, the 18th of June of 2020. And you are in West Coast Cookbook and Speakeasy. I am your chef de cuisine, Justice Putnam. Gunner, the English Bulldog, is our snoozing sous chef. And our daily special today is Metro Shrimp and Grits Thursdays. A little bit of jambalaya, a little bit of spice in your life. Okay, well, hey, you know what? I had a case of mangoes, and I turned that into a really nice compote. Spiced it up a little bit with some heat. Oh my, was it good. And we just have a little bit left. So if you have, some extra mangoes, there are tutorials on how to cut a mango. Quickly, the pit is rather flat. So if you can envision how that pit is laying inside the fruit, cut down halfway, missing the pit, and then score. And when you've got that piece or those pieces, score that. And scoring means, do a hatch work gently with a knife, careful not to go through the skin. When you've done that, push on the skin upwards so that all of those little cubes fan out. And you can either eat as is or just lop those off into a bowl and have at it. Yes, indeed. Some people even put it on a grill and get some grill marks and caramelization and then do the scoring. I find if the fruit's a little too ripe before you do that, the grilling, it softens it up too much. But it's still lovely tasting. Oh my, yes. Well, in more serious concerns in the world, did you know that all we have to do is think good thoughts, loving thoughts towards each other, and racism will disappear? It will. That's the argument I have now from some hot yoga gurus who seem to have descended on Ashland, Oregon. How many hot yoga gurus can Ashland hold? Ashland, Oregon has a lot of hot yoga gurus. There's only one hot yoga guru facility in town, but on the community page, there are scores. And I don't mean the kind where you've hatched a grid mark. No. I mean lots of actual numbers of hotbox yoga gurus who all seem to be maggot libertarians. Okay. Well, you would expect some sort of yoga franchise to hold that type. Oh my God. So now I'm being told that I have to think for myself. You know what I hate? Is having some little snot-nosed whippersnapper or hot box or hot yoga. I like to call it hot box yoga. hot yoga guru types telling me that I have to think for myself. Okay. As if I haven't been doing that for a few more decades than these little whippersnappers. All right. I don't mean that I should have to demand the respect I deserve merely because of my age. But back in my day, you usually did. Well, not always, because there were always some idiot old people that were racist and bigots and hate-filled people. So somehow, I don't know how this happened. I think it's like an alternative universe. But somehow, liberals are hate-filled monsters, and that's the reason that we have racism. If we would just think good thoughts about those people, don't prejudge those racists as racists. You're prejudging them. You're being bigoted to them. If you did not just label them that way, they wouldn't be that way. And I have to tell them no. I grew up with crosses burned on our lawn, and we were good neighbors to everybody, and it didn't matter. We had our cat set on fire. We had a Molotov cocktail thrown at the garage. I mean, please. And this is back in the summer of love days, buddy. Mr. Hot Guru, or Hot Yoga Guru. I think he's actually a devotee rather than a guru. I don't think he's elevated to that point. But, are they pearl-clutching about how hate-filled Black Lives Matter is and all those hate-filled people, and they will not believe that Boogaloo boy is a fascist. He can't be a white supremacist fascist. He's Mexican. Oh, I never heard of any fascists in Latin America before. Jesus. I mean, Ashland is a college town, and you would think some people went to college that live in that town. Is our educational system that bad now? Have I been so removed from it? No, I haven't. I have kids, well, grandkids now. My son went through the educational system, and he was a smart kid. Same age as this hot guru devotee challenging my credibility. Oh, God. Well, I suppose if you live as a white, entitled hot guru or hot yoga guru, maybe he is a hot guru. I don't know. Maybe the chicks like him. And I bet they are chicks in his mind. They always reveal themselves. Always. Well, since all we have to do is just think loving thoughts to all the racists and bigots out there, all the militarized cops coming at us as we hold our flowers of love, all those tanks coming and grinding us under their tank treads. I think actually they're tires now, but you know what I mean. It's still going to grind you up. And your last thoughts while you're being ground up is, well, at least I love them before I died. Sounds to me like they're kind of setting us up for, the cookbook. They're not trying to help humanity. They're trying to fatten us up, soften us up, tenderize us, and cook us. What's on the rest of the menu here in the Bistro Cafe as Gunner, the English bulldog, snoozes his sous chef shift away? Try saying that real fast. Well, at the top, Adam Schiff ripped Bill Barr for using the DOJ to protect Trump from Bolton's book. Yeah, well, I wouldn't mind putting Bolton in stir and have him read that on an audiobook, maybe. He could call it in like Mumia used to do. Then, on the rest of the menu, the Black Lives Matter Global Network Foundation has established a fund worth more than $12 million to aid organizations fighting institutional racism. Oh, did you know that Soros is funding that? But if you mention that using Soros as a reason for the evils in the world is an anti-Semitic trope, you will be told that you are the real anti-Semite for bringing that up. Because Soros is a pedophile monster. Oh, God. And I'm supposed to think for myself. All right, I will. Minnesota waived its absentee ballot witness signature mandate, and the new chief of the U.S. Agency for Global Media has begun a deep purge to turn the voice of America and its sister outlets into a Trump administration propaganda machine. Well, Voice of America will be Voice of Trump. After the break, we move to the chef's table, where the former governor of the northern Mexican state of Coahuila pleaded guilty in a U.S. district court to money laundering and concealing bribes for road building contracts. And the U.S. State Department issued a pirate warning to boats and oil rigs in the southern Gulf of Mexico. All that and more on West Coast Cookbook and Speakeasy. Bon appetit. Bottom of our homepage at netrootsradio.com. To the rightish of the page is our chat room link, monitored by Kelly Lincoln, who does so much more than just monitor the chat room, but thank you, Kelly, for doing that and so much more. To the leftish of the chat room link at the bottom of our homepage at netrootsradio.com is the link to our Patreon site. And if you could, even in these perilous times of pandemic and civil unrest, if you could afford an espresso-type coffee drink and send just, one cup of that, the cost of one cup of that to Netroots Radio once a month, we are able to stretch those dollars beyond compare. Even on the quantum level, we leave no crazy quark unstretched. And we are able then to pay our bills, and you are instrumental in helping us do that. Your generosity has thus far allowed us to do that for almost 10 years of continuous 24/7, 365 Resistance Radio. Nothing stops the show from going on. Nothing, because we are dedicated servants to democracy, and we take this job or vocation, call it as you will, with great seriousness. And all kidding aside, thank you for your generosity. And for those of you who would like to and can, this is an entreaty for help. So thank you if you can. And thank you to those who are. If you would like to follow Netroots Radio on Twitter, do so at Netroots Radio. Tom takes care of that, and rather pithily, I might add. And he does as well, so much more than just, take care of the Twitter feed. But thank you, Tom. I take care of at Justice Putnam, and you could go ahead and follow me there because I post the show notes and links diary on Daily Codes about 10 minutes before showtime, and then I link that up on Twitter and a few other social media platforms. In fact, all that I can figure out to put on. Yeah, and Twitter is right there too, so, follow me there. Follow the show on Twitter at Cookbook West, and pick up podcasts by way of Spreaker, Stitcher, TuneIn, iHeart, YouTube, iTunes, and wherever podcasts can be found. Oh, I should add, how about also check out my music show. The broadcast is on Sunday nights at 8 p.m. Pacific, so that would be 11 on the East Coast. But the podcast becomes available later on that night and certainly on Monday. And that's available anytime, but I do put links of it a couple of times during the week. And check out that. There's not much talking. It's a sonic poem. If you go to the show notes and links diary on Daily Codes, you'll find the playlist, which I try to post on social media anyway. But also the poem in which the theme of that Sunday's music show is derived. So check that out, Sundays at 8 p.m. On Netroots Radio. And also pick up the Justice Department, Musique Sans Frontières, Music Without Borders, by podcast, Stitcher, TuneIn, iHeart, YouTube, iTunes. Okay, there you go. All right, let's dive into this first offering here in the Bistro Cafe of West Coast Cookbook and Speakeasy. Metro Shrimp and Grits Thursdays. It comes out of the Associated Press by Aaron Morrison. The Black Lives Matter Global Network Foundation has established a fund worth more than $12 million to aid organizations fighting institutional racism in the wake of the George Floyd protests. The foundation, which has been influential in the emergence of broader Black Lives Matter movement, said it was setting aside $6 million in donations to support Black-led grassroots organizing groups. And last week, it unveiled a separate $6.5 million fund for its network of affiliate chapters. In this watershed moment for Black power building, it is critical that we democratize giving to ensure all of us have access to the resources we need to reverse centuries of disinvestment in Black communities and invest in a future where we can all be connected, represented, and free, spokesperson Scale said in a statement to the AP. According to the network's website, the organization has more than a dozen active chapters, including Boston, Chicago, D.C., and Detroit, as well as in Canada. Its newest chapter is in South Bend, Indiana. The foundation told the AP it has received more than $1.1 million in individual donations at an average of $33 per gift since the death of Floyd. And the surge of financial support adds to roughly $3.4 million in net assets that the BLM Global Network had on hand last year, according to a 2019 financial statement. You know what? Black Lives Matter releases their taxes. The fascist in the Oval Office won't. I wonder why. Creation of the fund signals a growth in infrastructure for the network, which had been at odds with some local chapter organizers who felt network leaders were not providing enough financial support for initiatives such as rapid response to police brutality. Although there are many groups that use Black Lives Matter or BLM in their names, only 16 are considered affiliates of the global network. Karnowski of the Associated Press brings us this next offering here in the Bistro Cafe of West Coast Cookbook and Speakeasy. Minnesota will waive its witness requirements for absentee ballots for the statewide primary election in August under the settlement of two lawsuits sparked by the health threat from the coronavirus pandemic. The lawsuits were filed by political arms of the League of Women Voters of Minnesota and the Minnesota Alliance for Retired Americans. Oh my! A Ramsey Court judge signed off on the consent decree with the retirees yesterday, Wednesday, while a federal judge scheduled a hearing for today on the league's case. Republican lawmakers complained that Democratic Secretary of State Steve Simon overstepped his authority by settling. The lawsuits and agreements are a flagrant abuse of the courts and complete runaround of the legislature, they said in a statement while they're trying to suppress the vote in every way they can, through the courts and sometimes around the legislatures. Under the settlements, Simon agreed that mail-in absentee ballots for the primary will be accepted even if they don't have witness signatures, and that ballots received within 2 days of the August 11th primary date will be accepted as long as they're postmarked by Election Day. Minnesota usually requires that a witness be a registered voter or notary public. And you have to pay a notary public. Wouldn't that be a poll tax? Wouldn't that be? The settlements don't apply to the November general election. The plaintiffs sought a quick answer for the primary because early absentee and in-person voting begins June 26th. League spokeswoman Kayla Vicks said her group is keeping the case open in case they decide to pursue it for the general election. Alliance attorney Mark Elias told the St. Paul Pioneer Press that he hopes to get similar changes for the November election via a similar settlement. If they litigated, we think they would lose, Elias said in an interview referring to lawyers for Simon and Attorney General Keith Ellison, who could decide to defend the state statutes. We're very confident we will prevail in the fall. The lawsuits were among several filed across the country in recent months over how citizens can safely cast their ballots, including at-risk older citizens who live alone and want to keep their distance from people who could expose them to COVID-19. The outcome could affect how many people turn out to vote in elections across the country, including the presidential race. States where cases are pending include Florida, New Jersey, Pennsylvania, South Carolina, Texas, Virginia, and Wisconsin. The U.S. Justice Department argued on Monday that Alabama's witness requirement does not violate the Voting Rights Act. Another lawsuit on behalf of the NAACP and the ACLU of Minnesota remains pending in state court. Those groups are asking that absentee ballots be sent to all registered Minnesota voters for the general election and to extend the witness waiver through the general election, state ACLU spokeswoman Lynette Kalsness said. Republican Senator Mary Kiffmeyer of Big Lake, a former Secretary of State who chairs a committee with jurisdiction over elections, denounced the settlements as a blatantly partisan attempt to circumvent the legislature that went above and beyond what lawmakers had approved. Yeah, well, you know what? You're representative of the people, and the people would like to vote. GOP Representative Jim Nash of Waconia, the lead Republican on a House Elections Subcommittee, accused Simon of colluding with a liberal organization to undermine our election laws, which is shorthand for we got our hands caught in the cookie jar trying to suppress the vote, because when people vote, they don't vote for us. Also of the AP brings us this final offering here in the Bistro Cafe of West Coast Cookbook and Speakeasy Metro's Shrimp and Grits Thursdays. The new chief of U.S.-funded international broadcasting yesterday, Wednesday, fired the heads of at least 3 outlets he oversees and replaced their boards with allies in a move likely to raise fears that he intends to turn the Voice of America and its sister outlets into Trump administration propaganda machines. Fears? There's no fear. They're just doing it. You don't need to fear it. U.S. Agency for Global Media CEO Michael Pack informed those he dismissed in email notices sent late Wednesday, just hours after he had sought to play down those concerns in an email to staff, saying he is committed to ensuring the independence of the broadcasters who are charged with delivering independent news and information to audiences around the world. After he said that, oh yeah, you're so independent, you're fired. Now you're really independent, pal and gal. 2 congressional aides said that among those removed from their positions were the head of Radio Free Asia Beifang, the head of Radio Liberty Radio Free Europe, Jamie Fly, and the head of the Middle East Broadcasting Network, Alberto Fernandez, the director and deputy director of Voice of America, Amanda Bennett, and Sandy Sugara had resigned from their positions on Monday. Pack, a conservative filmmaker and one-time associate of Trump's former political advisor, Steve Bannon, the guy who's running a fascist school in Italy, except Italy won't give him an actual castle to do his fascising in, said in a notice to those fired that he was taking the step consistent with his authority as the new CEO of the overall agency. It gave no reason for his decision. Now remember, Trump basically overrode all protocol and installed this guy as the CEO. He added in the notices that he expected the agency's new board of directors, chaired by himself, to approve the decision. I bet they will, since he's chairing the boards. In a separate message, Pack also announced that he had removed all the current members of the broadcasters' respective boards and installed his own team, with officials from various agencies, including the Office of Management and Budget and the Department of Housing and Urban Development. The firings came after Pack had tried to allay mounting concerns about his intentions at the agency in an email to staff in which he said he is committed to maintaining the agency's independence and adhering to VOA's charter and its principles, and then he fired everybody right after that. What up? Well, doing this particular kind of purge is very Vladian. Very. Okay, let's get to our break, and when we get back from that break, we will go through weather from around the world, and we will finish up with the stories that we have curated for you today. You are listening to West Coast Cookbook and Speakeasy, and we will be right back.
You are listening to netrootsradio.com.
Please hang up and try again.
From a point at sea to the circles of your mind, a new force is at work for planetary transformation. New radio for a new Earth.
This is Take Two Movie Review. I'm Mike Friend. This week, The Moss Show. In the new movie Shirley, Elizabeth Moss takes on the title, if not leading role, in a loose biopic about the 1950s horror writer Shirley Jackson, based on Susan Merrill's novel Shirley. As the movie begins, young academic Fred Nemser and his wife Rose roll up on their new assignment at Bennington College in Vermont, expecting to stay a few days with his supervising professor, Stanley, and his writer wife Shirley. The Nemsers are prevailed upon to stay on a bit to help with Shirley, whose problems only start with being agoraphobic. Shirley is brilliant and acerbic, insightful and mercurial, and wrecked that she is beginning work on a novel that we know will become 1951's Hangs a Man, about a Bennington student named Paula who had gone missing prior. Director Josephine Decker, who gave us Madeline's Madeline in 2018, focuses on the relationship between Shirley and Rose, who in Shirley's mind at its most twisted is commingled with the missing Paula from her work. We see conflict and camaraderie, a competition of wits, and the mutual struggle of being a woman, let alone an artist, in 50s academia. Along with this dynamic, we have that of Shirley and husband Stanley, played by a delightfully prickish Michael Stuhlbarg. This relationship brings to mind one from Who's Afraid of Virginia Woolf. Fred, whose character is underexplored, is at once dominated by Stanley and in awe of him, watching as his mentor mingles amongst the co-eds and faculty. Decker's contrast of the claustrophobic and panoramic and use of handheld close-ups that seem almost wired to Shirley's mind make Shirley as frenetic a ride as you'll ever see for what's more of a character study than a story. This has been Take Two Movie Review. I'm Mike Friend. Catch up with us at Take2MovieReview.com and feed us back on our channel on YouTube.
This is Scientific American's 60 Second Science. I'm Annie Sneed. Coral reefs are among the most productive ecosystems in the world. They're also in serious danger. Climate change and other threats are killing them off. But researchers have come up with an invention they think could help the reefs: 3D printed corals. At the heart of reef ecosystems lies the symbiosis between corals and algae.
Corals use light. They're photosynthesizing, so they have microscopic algae inside the tissues, and these use light to generate energy, and that energy is then transferred to the coral animal host, and the animal host in return transfers certain byproducts to the algae, and so they have a symbiosis going on.
Daniel Wang-Persert, a coral reef scientist at the University of Cambridge. This tight-knit bond between algae and corals is what makes reefs so incredibly productive. And because of this symbiosis, corals have evolved sophisticated skeletal and tissue structures for collecting sunlight.
So usually you would have this kind of rapid light attenuation, but through the skeleton, light is kind of pumped and guided into deeper, otherwise shaded areas. So there's lots of tricks that corals use. And in our work, we copied some of them.
Wang-Persert and his colleagues imaged corals to analyze their skeletal and tissue makeup. They then used a 3D bioprinter to build an intricate structure that mimics real corals. The printed corals were made of biomaterials like cellulose and had algae embedded in them. And because the researchers were able to replicate coral structure so well, the algae grew tremendously, up to 100 times more densely than they normally grow in the lab. Wang-Persert says their 3D printed creation could be used as a medium to grow algae to produce bioenergy, and also as a tool for studying the coral-algae symbiosis.
At the same time, of course, there is many other ways how this technology can be further scaled and improved to create, I would say, something like artificial corals in the future. So this is just the first step where we recreated the animal host, but we are now continuing to further replicate this animal-alga symbiosis, and we're developing model systems, and eventually, of course, it would be nice that this can have direct applications in coral reef restoration.
Thanks for listening. For Scientific American's 60-Second Science, I'm Annie Sneed.
This program is presented by the Centers for Disease Control and Prevention.
Colorectal cancer is the number 2 cancer killer of men and women in the United States, but it is preventable. Early on, colorectal cancer typically has no symptoms. It starts with a precancerous polyp or abnormal growth in the colon, which can be removed without surgery. Several tests are available to find these polyps, so they can be removed before they turn into cancer. Screening also finds colorectal cancer early when treatment works best. Recommended screening for adults at average risk begins at age 50 and continues until age 75. Learn about screening test options and find out which tests are covered by insurance. Talk to your healthcare provider about when you should be screened and discuss the best tests for you. For more information about colorectal cancer prevention, please visit cdc.gov/vital signs.
For the most accurate health information, visit cdc.gov or call 1-800-CDC-INFO.
This program is presented by the Centers for Disease Control and Prevention.
The discovery of penicillin in 1928 by Alexander Fleming was one of the greatest scientific achievements of the 20th century. It's hard to imagine a world before the development of what many consider to be miracle drugs. However, just 90 years ago, antibiotics weren't available. Thanks to antibiotics, some common illnesses such as strep throat are now easily treated, whereas in the past they often led to serious complications. Antibiotics serve an important role in keeping you and your loved ones healthy, but it's important to remember that antibiotics only treat bacterial infections. Most common infections such as colds, flu, most sore throats, bronchitis, and many sinus and ear infections are caused by viruses and do not respond to antibiotic treatment. These infections can be overcome by simply treating the symptoms and letting the illness run its course. Unfortunately, antibiotics have often been overused, resulting in decreased effectiveness and an increase in antibiotic-resistant diseases. Antibiotic resistance, or the increased ability of bacteria to survive in the presence of antibiotics, has become a major public health threat that we all need to help fight. When a person takes antibiotics, they are at risk for possibly having a bad reaction to these drugs. Some side effects can be quite serious, or even life-threatening in the case of an allergic reaction or severe diarrhea. This is why it is very important to only use antibiotics when they are absolutely needed, and not for viral infections. Talk to your healthcare professional about the best treatment for your illness. If it is caused by a virus, follow his or her recommendation for treating the symptoms. Learn more about appropriate antibiotic use and how to feel better when you don't need an antibiotic by visiting CDC's Get Smart, Know When Antibiotics Work website at cdc.gov/getsmart/community.
For the most accurate health information, visit www.cdc.gov or call 1-800-CDC-INFO.
Hi, it's Tom. Could we humbly suggest your donation to netrootsradio.com? All we've got to run this 24-hour powerhouse of progressive resistance radio is what comes out of our own wallets. And you are our biggest donor. It doesn't take much, $3, $5. Just go to the bottom of our netrootsradio.com page and hit our secure donate button. Heck, you can even make a recurring contribution, and you'll get a wondiferous pair of Netroots radio stickers for application to your backpack, your bumper sticker, or your banjo. Well, it's up to you which backpack you want to put it on. So donate what you'd like at the bottom of our netrootsradio.com's homepage, because you are our biggest donor. netrootsradio.com. Together, we are Resistance Radio.
Recently, at a protest in Buffalo, New York, against the police killing of George Floyd, 2 police officers, without provocation or justification, shoved 75-year-old Martin Gugino backwards. He cracked his head and suffered serious injury. And then the story gets worse.
I'm Baratunde Thurston from The Onion, and also, mother. You're listening to the Civil Liberties Minute with ACLU attorney Bill Newman.
The video shows blood seeping from Mr. Gugino's right ear and a phalanx of officers parading past him on the sidewalk, offering him no help or aid. Later, while Mr. Gugino was in the midst of a long hospitalization, apparently having suffered a brain injury, the President of the United States got involved. Trump accused Gugino of staging his fall, faking his injuries, of using fake blood as a prop, of being a violent person and a provocateur, somehow scanning police communications. For these accusations, there is no basis whatsoever. None, no facts. As John Thune, the number 2 Senate Republican, said, that's a serious accusation, which should only be made with facts and evidence. And I haven't seen any yet. What are the ways to fight back against these assaults on our fundamental and precious First Amendment freedoms? We can try to not be intimidated by the government and continue to use our First Amendment rights to videotape, to assemble, to protest, to march, to speak up and speak out.
The Civil Liberties Minute is made possible by the ACLU because freedom can't protect itself.
I'm Rick Smith, and this is Labor History in 2. On this day in labor history, the year was 1918. That was the day that the St. Paul Federation of Women Teachers, Local 28, received their charter from the American Federation of Teachers. That next February, the Minnesota Women's Union was joined by the St. Paul Federation of Men Teachers, Local 42. Organizing separate locals by gender was common at the time. It was not until 1957 that the teachers united together into one local. One of the founding members of the Women's Local was Mary McGuff. Mary had been a teacher since 1903. She was still an active participant in the union in 1946 when the Women Teachers Local 28 led the first organized teachers' strike in United States history. At the time, the idea of a teacher's strike was practically unheard of. In fact, strikes by public sector workers were explicitly forbidden and illegal. Despite this, 90% of the teachers voted to walk out on strike. The core issues of the strike were improving education, including a demand for smaller class sizes and improving the crumbling infrastructure of the city's public school system. The men's local joined the women on the picket line, but it was the women who organized the action. Mary McGuff was nearly 60 years old at the time. During the 6-week strike, Mary took to the radio. Her voice shared the story of the strike with the public. One striker remembered that Mary was able to cut politicians to threads, but did it in a very ladylike fashion. Finally, the strike ended in victory for the teachers. In 1969, the union established the Mary McGuff Award, which honors teachers for the advancement of education in the St. Paul schools.
Labor History in 2 brought to you by the Illinois Labor History Society and The Rick Smith Show. For more information, go to laborhistoryin2.com.
This is Solidarity News on Radio Labour.
I'm C. Mary Ainsborough. Perhaps one of the hardest hit groups of workers affected by the pandemic is domestic workers. There are more than 60 million domestic workers in the world. About 11 million of these are migrant workers. They are represented at the world level by the International Domestic Workers Federation. The IDWF's president is Myrtle Witbooi from South Africa. She spoke recently to a webinar held to discuss the plight of the world's domestic workers. She mentions Convention 189, which is an international law designed to protect domestic workers, devised by the UN's International Labour Organization.
I think that the IDWF is facing the biggest challenge since our launch in 2013. We are facing domestic workers that is losing their jobs, thousands of domestic workers. We are facing undocumented workers that have got no access to social security or funding. We are facing unemployment fund that is not reaching to domestic workers. And we are facing employers that is threatening domestic workers with no work, no pay. We are finding many of our domestic workers locked out of workplaces, sitting on the streets. We are finding domestic workers that have got nowhere to go because they can't go back to their countries. So at this moment, we are facing with how are we going to reach many of those workers? How are we going to let our governments listen to the plight of the workers? Poverty and hunger is facing the domestic workers, and also domestic workers' children that have to go to school. Domestic workers' children doesn't have access to clothes and anything. So I think that we have to put our heads together of how are we going to come out of this crisis and how will we be able to do much more for domestic workers, and how will we be able to reach out to the government to see that domestic workers have access to social funds, to unemployment funds. And this is what we're actually striving for, is to see many domestic workers' offices are closing because domestic workers can't keep their offices open because there is no funding.
Another participant in the webinar held on June 16th, the International Day for Domestic Workers, was Mariki Koning. Ms. Koning is a policy advisor with the International Trade Union Confederation. The ITUC is the organization which represents national union centers such as the Ghana Trades Union Congress at the world level.
The world COVID-19 pandemic has impacted domestic workers deeply. The majority are women and many belonging to marginalized communities. And this shows the profound relevance of ratifying and implementing ILO Convention 189. While the world COVID-19 pandemic has dropped countries around the world in a health and social and economic crisis, with devastating impacts on jobs and livelihoods on millions of workers and communities, it has disproportionate impacts on women and marginalized groups, and has exposed many gaps in our systems, including the lack of social protection and quality public health and care services. Across the world, the domestic workers are left out of relief or assistance plans and response packages of governments. So they have no compensation for income loss. And in the case of migrant domestic workers, we've seen horrific cases where they were dumped on the streets and leaving them without any home to stay or income to buy food. So there's an urgent need to provide assistance, protection, and income security to domestic workers. Domestic workers are in the front lines, and while frontline workers are in highly feminized sectors such as health and care services, domestic work, food, and so on, are working tirelessly to keep our societies going. So they are experiencing increased exposure to gender-based violence. Health and care workers, over 70% of whom are women, are experiencing trauma and psychological impacts on a daily basis, and many have been and still are lacking the necessary personal protective equipment.
You can learn more about the working conditions of domestic workers at idwfed.org. I'm C. Marie Ainsborough. Thank you for listening.
Thank you for accompanying us here to the Chef's Table at West Coast Cookbook and Speakeasy, Metro Shrimp and Grits Thursdays. We always begin, whether from around the world, along the banks of the Rogue River, in the Rogue River Valley of Southern Oregon on the west coast of the continental United States of America, where it is currently 53 degrees Fahrenheit. We are expecting a high much warmer than yesterday, in the mid-80s. And sunshine and a few afternoon clouds. Winds will be out of the north at 5 to 10 miles per hour in just a few hours. Tonight will be mainly clear with lows in the upper 50s, low 60s. Winds will shift out of the north-northwest at 5 to 10 miles per hour. And then shifting again tomorrow out of the north at 5 to 10 miles per hour, where it will be partly cloudy and highs expected in the low 90s. Confirmed coronavirus cases in Jackson County has jumped to 85. None dead that have been reported, but that's only because they don't report that. And so that's confirmed cases, and we continue to spike. And we are one of 22 states that have seen a spike because about 14 to 21 days ago, people decided to violate the orders of that jackboot dictator Kate Brown. Her liberal henchmen wanted us to just be healthy. How dare she dictate to us? Grass pollen right outside the mothership is rated very high. The air quality index in the Rogue River Valley region is good at 26 parts per million, and the daytime UV index remains very high at 9. Take care. Slather on the highest SPF that you have in your abode. Barometric pressure is holding steady at 30.15 inches. Visibility is up to 10 miles. And relative humidity is at 93%. Weather from around the world is brought to you by people's personal weather stations that they purchased. These people planted these purchased personal weather stations somewhere on their property, and these people positively live around the world. They do, too. London is 64 and mostly cloudy. Paris is 70 and cloudy. Rome is 77 and fair. Kyiv is 76 and fair. Kabul is 81 degrees and fair. Hong Kong is 80 degrees and fair. It's almost like a theme, almost. Tokyo is 68 degrees with rain. Sydney, Australia is 54 and partly cloudy. San Francisco, California is 61 degrees and sunny. And New York is 70 degrees Fahrenheit with haze. And that is weather from around the world, brought to you by people's personal weather stations that they purchased. These people planted these purchased personal weather stations somewhere on their property. And these people positively live around the world. Well, before we begin this first amuse-bouche here at the Chef's Table at West Coast Cookbook and Speakeasy, I should mention that the Supreme Court ruled against Trump on the Dreamers. So that's something. We'll dive into some of that tomorrow, and I'm sure that if David hasn't already, and he will tomorrow as well. So this first amuse-bouche is brought to us by the ever-present anonymous worker bees at Reuters. A former governor of the Mexican state of Coahuila has pleaded guilty to charges that he laundered money to conceal bribes paid to him in return for road-building contracts, the U.S. Department of Justice said yesterday, Wednesday. Jorge Torres, who served as interim governor of the northern border state for most of 2011, was arrested in Mexico early last year and extradited to the United States in October to face trial in federal court for the Southern District of Texas. Torres governed the state, which borders Texas, for the Institutional Revolutionary Party, or the PRI, which dominated Mexico's political landscape for the best part of a century. U.S. prosecutors in Texas charged Torres and Hector Javier Villarreal, a former Coahuila finance minister, with fraud, theft, and illegal transfer of funds in 2013. Torres entered a guilty plea for his part in a money laundering scheme that included offenses against a foreign nation involving bribery of a public official. Torres faces up to 20 years in prison and a possible $500,000 fine. As part of his plea, he agreed to forfeit property in the United States linked to the bribes. U.S. Judge Nelva Gonzalez-Ramos has set Torres' sentencing for the 10th of September. Villarreal, who has also been convicted in the southern and western districts of Texas for money laundering offenses, and is likewise awaiting sentencing, it added. The PRI, which governed Mexico from 1929 to 2000, and again from 2012 to 2018, suffered a crushing defeat in the last election at the hands of veteran leftist Andres Manuel Lopez Obrador after a series of damaging corruption scandals. Lopez Obrador, who took office as president in December of 2018, has vowed to root out political corruption in Mexico, and it seems to be working.
Je te donne ce mon amour pour la vie entière, la promesse de me trouver à tes genoux. Aussitôt que tu m'appelles, rester toujours fidèle, c'est tout, c'est tout. Je te donne tous mes printemps, mes étés de mer, mes automnes quand les feuilles tombent partout. Si ce n'est pas une bonne affaire, je te donne tous mes hivers, c'est tout.
And even more anonymous worker bees at Reuters bring us this final amuse-bouche here at the Chef's Table at West Coast Cookbook and Speakeasy. The U.S. government issued a warning about the threat posed by pirates to boats and oil installations in the southern Gulf of Mexico, in the latest sign of concern about ongoing security challenges facing Mexico. Armed criminal groups have been known to target and rob commercial vessels, oil platforms, and offshore supply vessels in the Bay of Campeche area in the southern Gulf of Mexico, the U.S. State Department said in an updated travel advisory. The overall risk level to Mexico remained the same in the bulletin, but the warning comes after a number of reported incidents in recent months, including an attack in November of an Italian-flagged vessel off the state of Campeche. Well, that brings us to the end of our broadcast period for the day. And, of course, you know, Netroots Radio will broadcast on, and we'll meet up here tomorrow for Blue Moon Spirits Fridays. So do stay tuned to Netroots Radio all day and all night for all the breaking news as it breaks, and we'll meet up here tomorrow, right here in West Coast Cookbook and Speakeasy. Bon appetit.
Je voudrais du soleil vert, des dentelles et des théières, des photos de bord de mer, dans mon jardin d'hiver. Je voudrais de la lumière, comme en Nouvelle-Angleterre. Je veux changer d'atmosphère, dans mon jardin d'hiver. Ma robe à fleurs, sous la pluie de novembre, tes mains qui courent, je n'en peux plus de t'attendre. Les années passent, il est loin, là je tombe. Nul ne peut nous entendre. Je voudrais du Fred Astaire, revoir un latte Goël. Je voudrais toujours te plaire dans mon jardin d'hiver. Je veux déjeuner par terre, comme au long de golfe clair, t'embrasser les yeux ouverts dans mon jardin d'hiver. De novembre, tes mains qui courent, je n'en peux plus de t'attendre. Les années passent, il est loin, là je tombe. Nul ne peut nous entendre. Ba-da-da-dum-di-da-dum. 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 Dans mon jardin d'hiver. Ba-da-da-dum-di-da-dum. 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 Dans mon jardin d'hiver. Dans mon jardin d'hiver. Dans mon jardin d'hiver.